because the next session starts at 3:30 sharp. So,
okay, so my window is 30 minutes plus 15, or you would prefer 25 minutes?
I will put it 40 plus 15.
40 plus 15. Okay.
Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay. I would love for people to. I think it would be good for people to have some questions.
Yeah, that's my
Great.
that's my suggestion.
Great.
Floor is yours. You take your choice.
Great.
You take your call.
Thank you.
So, friends, it's a real delight and honor for us here today, for me personally also, to present to you Professor Vasanthi Srinivasan from IIM Bangalore. She has been a very old friend of ours for long years. As you heard, she had come to Suscon before. Personally, with me, we had a long relationship. We had met in several places outside IIM Shillong, IIM Calcutta, IIM beyond IIM Bangalore also. Last time in abroad, I was doing her presentation in Poland, I remember, and we met at Geneva for Christoph Stuckelberger's conference. Christoph is known to Professor Kapoor also, and so all common friends. So, friends, Vasanthi has been a very powerful and eloquent, not just a management academic, but a kind of a crusader for corporate governance, CSR, and the public policy domains, specifically in relation to the rejuvenation and reorientation of the corporate towards taking care of societal and governance issues. I won't go into details, and she has a formidable list of publications and conferences to her credit, and I'm not going to go into all that. Her presentation will speak for herself, who she is. So, Vasanthi, the floor is yours. By now, 230 students have already accumulated, and more are coming. So, floor is yours, please.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Sanjay. And just listening to Sanjeev when you talk about with Achintya on the 2011 conference brings a lot of good memories and really, really very positive feelings about IIM Shillong. And I think I am overdue for a visit after the pandemic. When you requested me to speak at this conference, I wondered what it is that I should talk about, because we have a nice mix of conference participants along with students, the first year students who are coming into the program and the second year students. Okay. Then I thought, what is it that could provide enough opportunity for this diverse range of people who are attending today's session? So that's how I decided that I will choose a theme that lends itself flexibly, and which is, what does it mean to become a future-ready leader? Yeah. And this session and the theme of this conference on holism, harmony, and happiness could not have come at a better time, nor could it have been a more powerful set of 3 words, because as I interact with CEOs globally, the 2 themes that have come over and over since March 2020 have been happiness of employees and gratitude of individuals. Okay? These 2 have never been a part of management lexicon for the 35 years that I have spent in this field. It was an occasional person who spoke about happy employees or happy customers. Of course, happy customers is more common. But in the last 1.5 years, I've heard compassion. I've heard gratitude. I have heard, let us listen to people. And all of this is very, very new. Okay? So in some ways, I want each one of you, particularly the young management graduates, to note for yourself that you are at an inflection point. Now, you would have heard this statement so many times, but I just want to share with you is that I was exactly at this inflection point in 91. Today, when you read an economics textbook or a management textbook, people will talk about liberalization, privatization, and globalization of India, the 1991 story. And believe you me, in that year, I was on the doctoral program. And I often talk about the pre-91 Vasanthi and the post-91 Vasanthi. Because whatever I was taught pre-91 just somehow became irrelevant as I went into the world post-91. The dramaticness is not very visible because as people keep talking about, change creeps. Change is rarely dramatic. Events are dramatic. Episodes are dramatic. COVID is dramatic. But your adaptation to COVID is creeping. Because day in and day out, as you live the reality, you change, you alter, you adapt. And after a point in time, it really hits you one day saying how much you have changed. Okay. So that's really how I'd like for you to see COVID. There is a pre-COVID and a post-COVID to everything that we are going to talk about 15 years from now. And you will be leaders crafting new realities for organizations at that stage. I want us to just be mindful because most of my non-Indian counterparts refer to their schools as business schools, whereas we are a management school. And I hope as students of management, you appreciate and understand this because the new reality is not about business alone, while it is significant for businesses. Management is needed in government. It's needed in hospitals. It is needed in the not-for-profit sector. It is needed in every walk of life. And what the school is preparing you for is to be a student of management, an observer of management, and a practitioner of management. And this management could be in any walk of life. You could be creating your own businesses. You should be working for other businesses, or you could be working with the government, or you could be working with the not-for-profit. It really should not matter because at the end of the day, you are management professionals enabling managing. Okay? Why is this context important to set? Because a lot of what I'm going to talk about is about management, not necessarily corporations alone, while they are a significant player in the entire agenda. So what has the pandemic done? The pandemic has done 4 things, and there will be several things that your faculty will bring and several of the participants on the conference, I'm sure you've heard other speakers talk about COVID. And I'm just going to frame it for the purpose of this session a little differently. Continued uncertain economic impacts, altered social behaviors, changed psychological states, but above all, deepening of social divide. Whether it is access to healthcare, whether it is access to technology, whether it is migrant worker, doesn't really matter. It's just deepened the divide. And as you now see the numbers that are coming from the World Economic Forum and the UN, what is becoming very clear is that on gender, we've gone back 95 years as a world. Okay? So you are going into this world as future leaders with what you could perceive as either complete challenges, debilitating challenges, or a canvas of opportunities to shed the old to create a new. And my talk really comes from being able to visualize an altered world for the young leaders for tomorrow. I will come back and talk to the conference participants in our role as researchers and academics, but I will keep that for the later because whatever I'm going to speak is not going to substantially change other than the last part in terms of what is the research agenda and what is the academic and scholarship agenda for us as we look into the future. So what have we seen in the last few months? The first and the most important one is that we've seen the globalization of the pandemic. We spoke of globalization of markets. We spoke about globalization of currency. For the first time, we saw the globalization of the pandemic. What did it mean? It has challenged our fundamental assumptions about capitalism. And capitalism has been the bedrock for the last 50 years of how we have imagined companies and other entities to be. The assumption that the free markets, to whatever extent they are free, or varieties of capitalism as they exist in different countries with the regulation, both hard as well as soft regulation, means that there are varieties of capitalism, but this unquestioned belief that capitalism is good for all has got challenged. So in some ways, as we are in this conference, talking of holism, it's important to reimagine capitalism. And in particular, re-examine what is the role, and I'm going to talk first a little bit about the role of corporations in the context of this reimagining of capitalism. Society clearly is now demanding that companies have a social purpose. How far, how much more is something that is getting debated across different countries. In India, while we are beginning to see the glimmers of this kind of questioning, I think we still have a long way to go. Why am I making the statement that we are seeing the glimmers of what is to emerge for India? If you look at the 2013 Companies Act, for the first time, it has, through Section 166, called on the fiduciary responsibility of the board of directors to manage the organization in the interest of the stakeholders and not shareholders alone. You will encounter this in the classroom, where we will be teaching a lot of subjects which arise from a dominant shareholder perspective. However, you would begin to see the realities around, with the legislation explicitly calling out for a stakeholder responsibility of the board. It might seem like a line, a word in an act, but remember, and as students of management, we must remember that the rules are the compliance framework. And how do I look at compliance? Compliance is forcing to do something every time, which hopefully after several years of practice becomes a habit. So what we are seeing just now is compliance, but compliance is the baby step to habit. So more and more, we are going to be getting businesses being asked to comply. And I don't have a problem with it, because unless compliance happens to the law of the land, there is no point in talking of ethical, moral, purposeful behaviors. It's interesting. Now, if you think in India this is what has moved, then quite surprisingly and quite starkly in 2019, the Business Roundtable, which is an organization of CEOs in America, 181 of the CEOs actually said that they commit to lead their companies for the benefit of stakeholders. A public statement. Some of the largest funds in the world have called out for ESG, environment, social, and governance related companies which can be funded. So over the years, what are we now beginning to see? That there is a movement in terms of holding corporations accountable in terms of what they contribute to society. If you look at, and I'm going to juxtapose periodically between India and the global discourse, because India's narrative has slightly altered. Okay? And I want to also place this alteration within the context of the larger demands of the kind of a nation we are. Okay? So the significant difference between India's approach to corporate social responsibility and the global discourse on corporate social responsibility is twofold. The first is that all over the world, CSR, responsibility of the corporation, is seen as something voluntary. However, in the Indian context, and it's important that as students of management, you note this distinction. In the Companies Act, there is a mandatory component, which is a financial contribution, and there is a disclosure component, which has to do with the non-financials. And again, I hope that many of you will go back and look at it. 2018 to 2020, there have been a slew of legislations, all of which should have taken off now without the pandemic, but slew of interventions that we've had our first national guidelines on responsible business conduct, which has been released. We now have a new disclosure framework that this year SEBI has actually asked the top 1,000 companies, listed companies, to report on, which is actually the business responsibility and sustainability reporting. CSR, understood as financial spend in India, is now a board level item. So it's now assuming a strategic perspective, with the board needing to actually exercise care and due diligence in the way the company contributes to social development. All of these changes are happening in the environment. Please do not be oblivious of what is happening. I also struggle as an academic to bring all of this into the classroom. It's not easy. But as students of management, just being responsible and just being open-minded to the changes that are happening in the society becomes extremely important from a personal capability perspective, and I'll come back and tie that. So for those of you who may not have experience of organizations, you might ask the standard Friedman statement saying, why should companies need to do all of that? Isn't there the government to take care of society? Isn't that the notion of a welfare state? No doubt. However, what have we observed in the last 20 years? And this is where I'd like you to go and do more research and understand, is that the GDP of several countries of the world are lesser than the turnover of corporations. So if I ranked the 100 top companies on their turnover, several countries' GDPs are lower. The top 5 corporations which operate in the food business almost completely contribute to the food supply chain of the world. Okay? So, which means corporations are powerful entities. And multinational corporations have the resources and the wherewithal to pull things together if they choose to be a force of good. It is this choice of being a force for good, which is where I'm calling out to each one of you as future leaders who could potentially be working with some of these large corporations. As future leaders, 3 things will drive the way you make decisions. First, that businesses exist within a larger system, and therefore it is important that for the system to operate holistically and efficiently, all actors need to give and take. Comes the second question, the second aspect, that businesses take from society. What do they give back to the society? Okay? And you can't say products because you're paying for them. You can't say service because as an employee, you're giving your hours of time to them. Okay? So in some ways, beyond commercial transactions, what's that purposeful engagement with society? And which is where the 2 words that you're going to keep hearing for the rest of your lives, business responsibility and sustainability, are going to come into play significantly. So Let me quickly summarize what the setting of the context means for you as students. That the world is changing. It's changing in ways that we don't know. These changes are impacting societies. As students who are likely to join corporations, corporations are central to any economy. And if changes are happening in the economy, for me to be able to say that they will not impact me is foolish. And therefore, as leaders and decision makers, you're going to be anticipating how do these changes impact me in what ways? And what does it mean for me as a corporation, as a leader, to be able to navigate this new set of factors? Okay. I'm going to pause here and just call out to the researchers. There is a whole movement in several countries where senior academics are calling for responsible management research. Are we, as researchers, looking at what will responsible management look like countries like ours? All of us who write papers write this one line which says, there are not enough studies in emerging economies and developing countries. We often have one statement that context specificity impacts. And what have you and I done about it? Have we actually changed the narrative? Have we shaped the narrative? And are we gaining the courage to be able to say that it will take me 5 years, but I will build that context-specific understanding that is needed? So my call today to researchers in India is that we have adopted metrics for our ranking. Then those metrics we all know for the last several years pushes us away from what is important, relevant. How do we marry this? Because that's in the and which is why I love the topic of holism, because holism is just at several levels that one can talk about. What are we doing as academics to be able to remain relevant and remain rigorous? But more important, contribute to the responsible management discourse. And I do know that several of you at IIM Shillong, and I've kind of kept a track of some of your work. I mean, incredible work that you're doing, particularly with some insightful data from the Northeast. I think it'll be very valuable even to be able to shape a discourse for India, because we all know how diverse we are. So let me move to the next part of what I want to talk about. And I think I have 25 minutes, so maybe I'll take no more than 5 minutes to be able to wrap up. So in 2020, Rebecca Henderson wrote a book on reimagining capitalism. Okay, so if some of you get a chance to read it, it's relatively easy read book. And definitely those of you in the second year, I think, can pick some time to do that, can make some time for it. She basically talks about 5 things that she sees will change in the world. And the first one that she talks about is creating shared value for all stakeholders. Okay. Interesting. How do I create shared value for all? Second one, how do I building purpose-driven organizations? What will it take to build purpose-driven organizations? Third one, and for those of you who are specializing in finance, I think this is possibly the best time of your lives, because finance requires serious rewiring. As Rebecca Henderson says, rewiring finance. Okay, we all know how those markets are actually contributing quite negatively to the dominant narrative. Building cooperation. This is interesting, and I must share with you my own work over the last few years. And as Sanjay was talking about it, I've worked in this area since 2003. My interest started with gender, and then I moved on to look at justice, fairness in employment relationships, because I am a HR professional. And then I started a website for teachers in 2007 because it was almost impossible to get material then. Even if you were a committed teacher who wanted to teach ethics and responsibility, it was difficult. So since 2008, I've been running the website for teachers. In 2011, I went on to become a part of a large study which looked at how ethics teaching happens in business schools across the world. And then subsequently in 2016, I went on to I was a member of the Kotak committee. And in 2017, and then in 2018, 19, 20, I've been working on looking at on the drafting committee of the National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct, but also being able to look at work on business and human rights. So in a lot of these spaces, and so in some ways, my journey over the years has led me to believe very strongly that cooperation, collaboration is key to be able to achieve multiplier impact. This collaboration is at the level of coming together to be able to organize an event meaningfully. It's collaboration to do a research, to do a project whose sum is better than what each one of you would have individually contributed, all the way up to multi-stakeholder alliances. The need for the hour across the world is cooperation. And isn't it ironic that Sustainable Development Goals 17 has to be dedicated to partnerships and alliances. And in the absence of that goal, all the other goals will be rendered and unreachable. And last but not the least, rebuilding institutions and governments. And Rebecca is talking about these 5 as reimagining capitalism. Obviously, there are nuances for India, but what does this mean for us? Okay, so I just kind of thought about it as I was looking at this conference, looking at what I was going to speak, and I realized that for each one of you who are on the program today, it means 4 future-ready capabilities to build. The first future-ready capability is collaboration. I think collaboration is the most difficult one to do. Why? Because collaboration requires you to recognize that you don't know it all, that you can't do individually all of it. It also means that you have to recognize that someone else has strengths that are better than you. You also have to, in the process, recognize your own weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Therefore, you now see why collaboration is so difficult, because you have to play to others. You have to complement others' weakness, not just play to your strengths. The second one, and today as I look around me, there's just so many problems. And I love India because it's just got problems everywhere. Okay? What is having a problem mindset? I'm not saying problem solving mindset. Okay? I'm talking about identifying problem mindset. Identifying problem mindset gives you an opportunity to fix it. And that's the heart of innovation. Yeah? If everything worked perfectly, what is there for you left to create? So as you look at problems around you, your mind should be sparking, your neurons should be sparking, okay? Synaptic connections happening, which basically are calling out saying, how are you going to fix this problem? I think that's a capability that you need. Social stock exchanges, social enterprises, startups, the world is there at our feet, literally. Third one, I think in management schools, and having been through 2, I can tell you very confidently, at the end of 2 years, right, we'll be able to crack a case, any problem, better than anybody who is in the near vicinity. Not because we are so good at it, and not because we are such wonderful human beings and great individuals. No, nothing. It's just deliberate practice. And we practiced it so much in the classroom that in 5 minutes, you can put together a presentation, which most others will struggle. Okay. Second year students, I don't know to discriminate, but if I look at you, I'm sure there must be smiles on your faces because you've just cracked it, right? So in some way, just that advantage of being able to put presentations together quickly compared to others is a huge advantage wherever, in whichever part of workplace you are in. However, what's important is to do ethical decision making. Decision making we teach, decision making we engage with, but ethical decision making, because both sustainability and business responsibility, the heart of it is ethics, fairness, justice, equity. I don't think we talk enough as much, and maybe IIM Shillong is different. I think we need to talk much, much more about it than what we are doing today. And last but not the least, one of the most important capabilities that all of us as future leaders will require is systemic thinking, holistic thinking, looking beyond organizations. Let me pause here to the participants at the conference. I was wondering what specific ideas I could leave you with, and I could only come up with 4 of them. The first is that, can we get away from the principal agent conceptualization and transaction cost economics that has governed the way we frame problems? Can we more look at complexity theories, chaos theories, interorganizational relationships, hybrid organizations, varieties and forms of capitalism within India, prediction models that take into consideration qualitative aspects, particularly social costs and social value frameworks. I just felt that there was enough, right from challenging the traditional theories all the way up to looking at whether the tools that we use actually perpetuate a shareholder ideology. Do they even offer avenues for a stakeholder thinking? On that note, let me close by calling out, I know it's J.R.D. Tata's birth anniversary today, but he has single-handedly transformed not just a city, and I'm extremely mindful of it because I lived 2 years of my life in Jamshedpur. But I'm also mindful of the fact that with responsible thinking, he was able to create a global enterprise. So, keeping in line with the theme of the conference, I think all of us sitting in this room, the fact that we have come so far in our lives means we are privileged. And therefore, privileged have greater responsibility than the not so privileged. I call out to us both as researchers and as students of School of Management for us to be able to look at the conference theme of holism, harmony, and happiness as a way of life as we turn into future leaders, leading hopefully global corporations, but also as researchers who shape the narrative for the next generation of scholars. Thank you so much. Once again, IIM Shillong for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to deliberate on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vasanthi, for your powerful presentation, insightful and powerful. Vasanthi's presentations are always power-packed. It's not just my experience that has been reported by all students and participants from any of these schools or institutes of management, India or otherwise. Professor Kakoti, will you please take from here?
Sure. We have a distribution of resources and a distribution of work. So really enjoyed hearing you speak after a long time. So one of the areas that she did not cover and very close to her heart is entrepreneurship. And that is one area that I think has become the latest hit amongst the young people. They don't want to work under somebody. They'd like to create their own empires. Anyway, we have a couple of hands that have gone up, and I will call out the names as per the screen that's visible in front of me. So Shibani, would you please go first?
Sure, sir. Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you for that brilliant insight. In the context of business responsibility, you spoke about how businesses take from society and thus they have a responsibility to give back. In a way, I think that talks about how businesses must contribute to social welfare. And I was trying to connect it with the concept of equitable distribution of wealth. So in that context, do you think that the creation of billionaires, that is a select privileged few who have accumulated huge wealth in their hands with the help of the very same people who do not even have a minuscule proportion of that wealth, is that a failure of legislation and society in general?
Yeah, a good question, very good question. And from a corporate governance angle, so I'm going to look at this from multiple angles, okay? So from a corporate governance angle in several countries, Shivani, the questions that is being asked is saying, what should be the differential as a multiplier between CEO compensation and the lowest line worker compensation? So in some ways, I think definitely corporate India needs something like that, okay? And we are very proud of it because I think if you look at the models, if you look at the European models and to the Anglo-Saxon models, right? We have kind of just picked up the Anglo-Saxon model for whatever reason, okay? And that's not the best model for a country like ours, okay? So, and I have absolutely no hesitation in saying that from a corporate governance perspective, I think we are quickly going to reach a time where some conversation on the extent of CEO compensation has to be done, okay? There is no escaping that, okay? But having said that, I also want to flip your question in another way to be able to ask, should we take away value from somebody to be able to give value to someone else? Isn't that a zero-sum game? Why are we thinking like that? Okay. So now let me frame this argument slightly differently and be able to ask, in the process of creating more sustainable products, in the process of paying workers not minimum wages, but actually living wages, in the process of identifying alternate material that can substitute plastic, okay? Assuming a company creates value through the manner in which it does business, you may well end up in a situation where you will still have the billionaires, except that you might actually have a larger spread of billionaires. So the models of how we build, we squeeze from suppliers, we compromise on features, we are grabbing from everywhere. And we are creating exponential value for some people. I'm saying if we change the narrative that you can create your value by creating value for everyone, what is it going to require as a thinking? And which is why, I mentioned saying that we have to rewire finance. It's a very big part of the agenda. Unless the large funds begin to think ESG, right? That's why I said, no, capitalism, everybody is talking about it. That capitalism, if it has to reimagine, it has to be done through the financial flows. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, Shashwati, would you please go next?
Sure, sir. Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you. It was very, very engaging. I just find myself in a dilemma right now. I'll just pick up three phrases that you talked about. One was deepening divide that we are facing post-pandemic. The other is ethical decision-making. And then you were talking about rewiring of finance. Ma'am, when we go to a corporate setup, wherever we go to work after this, we see that there are two kinds of, so to speak, companies. One which have had their valuations completely doubled in the past year, and one that have completely gone out of business. So in such kind of a scenario, when I'm, say, a manager, and I may or may not be able to expect ethical decision making, and if only even one person around me doesn't do that, how do you expect me to act in such a manner? what will my position be?
Excellent, excellent. Okay, I think the first thing that you picked was very interesting because you have captured actually 3 phenomena happening in 3 different spaces. And I just want to kind of spend a little bit. Deepening divide in society and its implications on organizations. What does that mean? Okay, so that's one part of it. Then there is this whole system of rewiring finance, which is a global phenomenon. Okay, and it impacts the flow of resources into the organization. And then there is ethical decision making, where as an individual, I am here in between. Okay, in some ways, and therefore to counter your point, I would say that I often have students asking, what do I do? Okay, what do I do in this situation? My sense has been that all of us know what is unacceptable and unethical. We all know that, okay? We might use different heuristics to do that, okay? Like we were doing a workshop with some of our second-year students who come back from their summers, and we were talking about how do you know that someone is not, the smell is not right, okay? And I'm sure several of you have been asked, like, don't tell that you are from our company, even though you're doing your summers with us, please collect data anonymously, okay? Or, you've been told saying that you ignore that data when you're doing your model because the person is saying, give me. Yeah, we all know that there's something wrong there, okay? So my experience has been that at early stages of your career, just building the capacity to be able to identify a decision that is unethical is itself a journey. Yeah. And to be able to say that I may not be in a position today, but I recognize that it is wrong. 90% of the people cannot recognize it is wrong because we just say everybody does it. Look, if everybody cheats and you don't cheat, okay, it doesn't mean that cheating is right. You get it? Yeah. I mean, this applies as much to our campuses as it applies anywhere else, right? Oh, what can I do? Everybody cheats. Fine. That doesn't make it right. It is still wrong. Okay. So this is a situation of being able to at least identify and say, yes, this is wrong, and I'm engaging with it. I'm aware of it, but for whatever reasons, I'm doing it. To my mind, that is for the future, this is going to be the most important thing. If you lose this perspective of even being able to recognize, you're gone. This ability to recognize and say, I can't do anything about it just now, I'm going to raise it. So now let's come to the next one, awareness. Second one is voice. I think many of us don't use our voice. We don't even raise it. Okay, so that's the second level of decision making. Okay, I have raised it. I have told the people who are concerned. If they still don't act on it, that's the second level in terms of ethical decision making. And then there is the third level, which is that I raise my voice. I make sure that I'm working towards being able to provide enough support, because I raise my voice. Let's say my leader turned around and said, yes, Shashwati, I am not able to prove it. That's been the challenge. Okay. Now the third point would be, how am I actually supporting? And then, of course, the levels that everybody talks about, whistleblowing and all that, is at a much, much higher level. Okay. These are levels which I think all of us as individuals have to be mindful of. And when you become a manager, you have to be even more mindful of, because as a manager, it's important to be fair, but even more important to be seen to be fair. Yeah, justice. So, which is why I think at these two levels, it's important. And I always talk about awareness and voice as so critical for young professionals. Yeah.
Thank you so
Right.
much. Thank you.
I think Anup, Priyansha, and Aditi in that order can ask their questions.
Hello, ma'am. Good afternoon. It was lovely to hear from you. You are such a great orator. And my question was regarding that you have emphasized more on the compliance part that how
Yes.
it will be in the longer run, it will be the major part that will apply
Yes.
both in the CSR part and the CEO compensation, and
Correct.
we have parameters for that to guide that. But what are the other things that can, by which we can make this corporate accountable other than this compliance part? Because
Sure.
yeah, that is my question.
Great question, Anu. Great question. And to be honest, it is a little bit like, to me, compliance is hygiene. Has to be done. I mean, a corporation is an entity and you are a legal entity. Okay. So you jolly well comply. So that to my mind, that's how I was reacting to it. Okay. But what does compliance do in any society? Because I want us to think through this, because in a society like ours, where we have wonderful laws, but terrible enforcement, okay, it becomes very important, because sometimes we might think, what's the purpose of these laws? So from that perspective, what does compliance do? Compliance actually is a way to control behaviors. Yeah. So as people begin to comply, you hopefully will be able to see non-compliance more easily. And if you see non-compliance more, it's easy to actually punish. Okay. So at a very hygiene level, that's how you have to look at compliance. But beyond compliance, in my own work, and several years ago, I thought about an idea of organization character. Okay. So in some ways, how then I am complying, fine. Now what? Okay. If I really have to be this value creating corporation for the society, then I think it requires 4 things. And I'm now more or less pretty much certain about it. Okay. And in many of the case studies that I have written or I have looked at, these 4 keep coming back over. First one is leadership, intent, and commitment. There is no substitute for it. And when I use the word leadership, I'm going to use it in 2 ways. We often associate it with top management. Okay. But there is a role of champion leaders across the organization. Just at the top is of no use. You need champions, leaders who can champion at every level in the organization on the purpose of what we are doing, why we are doing. So I think that's the first one. The second one, I think in all the companies that I have worked with, highly ethical companies, walking the talk is very visible. Is very visible, and the penalties for non-adhering to standards, norms, work behaviors, equally strong. And I must tell you, I've had the privilege of closely being associated with 2 of the finest companies in the country. I worked in Wipro, and I have done multiple case studies and worked with the Tatas in different spaces. And my own learnings from there is no substitute to walking the talk. Okay. The third one is solid systems to back up. It's not enough for great individuals. You need solid systems to be able to back up everything that is done. And last but not the least is total consensus on the philosophy, but very interestingly, enough variations in implementation. This is the beauty, right? So at the philosophy and intent level, everybody signs off. But how it gets implemented, there can be variations. And having good metrics at the end of the day to measure. There's no substitute for that. Okay? What measures gets managed, and therefore no substitute to that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
So my question is that today's address started with the fact that how change is inevitable, and this is basically the change that we need to adapt to, right? So in this particular race, when all the factors that are affecting us to change, or all the factors that are leading us to change are uniform, how do we keep the originality or our natural essence intact? Because at the same time, when we're talking about adaptation, we also talk about how important it is to be original and to be different.
Yes.
But when the factors affecting us to change are uniform, how do we expect the consequences to be any different?
Beautiful. Great question, Aditi. Great. I mean, So I'm going to say something that I often do in when I'm doing leadership development, which is I ask this question that in my life I have never seen two similar leaders. Okay, I've never seen. Okay, even though a large part of leading teams, leading organizations is a science, which is why you're in a management school where we are trying to teach you, right? If there wasn't a belief that their large part of management is science, then you wouldn't be here studying it, right? So this assumption that there are practices that are enduring, that are science, is always there. That decision making in complex, uncertain environments is sometimes an art. And you will see that, right? Whether it's your team members, there's someone who has the style, there's someone who has a way of looking at things, there's someone who can just crunch that numbers so quickly, there's someone who can present that wonderful visual. So in some way, even though the content is the same, the way it comes across, there are variations. So to that extent, we also can talk of leadership as art. Yeah. But I don't know if you have studied Henry Mintzberg and strategy, okay? And when I used to work with Henry, Henry would say something very interesting. He would say that leadership is a craft. Yeah, and I want you to just reflect on it, because he says, which one of us cannot identify a M.F. Hussain painting or a Ravi Verma painting? There's clearly a science, right? We look at the painting and you know it. There's also an art in terms of the imagination, but above all, there is a signature which makes it distinctive. Yeah? The quest is really in being able to find your signature. How you cope, how you manage, how you engage actually is gradually your signature coming into play. Context is similar for everybody. Content in terms of what you know and how you are expected to think is also fairly similar, but it is in the way you bring it together that I think is different. Yeah. And over the years, I think that's one of the things that I have learned, is that it's in that combination that you bring your distinctiveness. It's not in the content, it's not in the context. Because there are hundreds of people who will be better than you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
There was another hand that had been raised, but it
Yes,
disappeared.
yes, sir. Priyansha this side.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so good afternoon, ma'am. Your oration was very great. I have one thing to say, that we are talking about business leaders. Easy search on Google will show that we have 1.626 million corporates in India registered as of September 2020. And the Tatas and the Birlas that we are talking about are hardly in minuscule numbers. So if we have to implement sustainability the way we want, it has to trickle down to all the 1.626 million corporates that we want to engage with. How do we deal with such a situation where the numbers are so high and just the contribution by just few of them will make a difference, but not as stated difference as we'd want to see? Especially if the industries are those which are heavy on cost benefits, that search for what is in it for me kind of a approach.
Yeah. I think this is one of the things that often bothers me on how would this happen if we have to actually move this thrust on sustainability. I think I'll respond to you in 3 different ways that I have thought about it, and what are the mechanisms that are needed. So I think the first one, and the reason why we are pushing the top 1,000 companies that are listed, we would all want that to happen, at least for them to start disclosing so that we know what it is that they are doing. And their market cap together, I think they hold 97% or something like that. So 95%, whatever. And that is a significant part of the total. The hope is also that as you remember that there are tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 supply chains, and a large number of them are small and medium enterprises tied to the large companies. The hope is that over a period of time, we might see a plethora of disclosures from companies. And I'm not for a moment is saying that disclosure is actual. No, but I'm just saying that this idea of thinking about it will be a kind of a whirlpool kind of an impact, concentric circles. I mean, that's one way from coming from governance. The other one I have often wondered is that in India, we don't have strong research-based countervailing organizations. So we can see a Center for Science and Environment, or you can occasionally see, an NGO, but we don't have strong think tanks that support customer rights. Tell me, where are the organizations that track customers and customers' products, and what is it that is happening? I mean, consumers almost seem to be disappearing, right? And consumer is central to a corporation. If there were no consumers, companies cannot sell. But where are the countervailing forces for consumer support?
The management is doing for the consumers at the end of the day.
But the question is what is in the interest of the consumer, the thing that is good in the interest of the organization?
Yeah.
It may not be, right? Because if as a customer, every customer who has a warranty will want the warranty to be fixed in that period. But if a customer starts fixing all the warranties, if an organization starts fixing all the warranties, they will lose, right? So it's interesting that they don't go in the same direction many times. That's been my experience. But where are these institutions? And I'm hoping that some of you will start up these institutions to be able to hold government accountable. And last but not the least, I think industry associations are not doing too much today. I personally feel many of them could do much better. They're not just lobbying entities. So when we talk of regulation, regulation is public regulation. That is what we all understand. But self-regulation, co-regulation at the level of industry bodies, I think all of those mechanisms have also got to kickstart, Priyansha. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. If it has to get momentum, it has to start across all of these.
Right. I don't think we have time for any more questions. We could spend the entire day because she's got such a treasure house of knowledge and experience that it's always fascinating to hear Vasanthi speak and respond to queries. I learn a lot each time I listen to her speak. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being with us. As a token of our appreciation, we have planted a sapling in your name in the main campus. It's called a sapling of hope in celebration of life.
Nice.
So next time around, when you come to our campus, you'll be able to see that sapling. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts and look forward to your continued support to whatever we are doing.
Yeah, thank you, Sanjeev.
There is, yes, it's on the screen, the
nice.
sapling. So thank you very much. We would be starting our second panel soon. So
thank you.
I was unable to take any more questions. I apologize for
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you very much. And we look forward.
Thank you, Vasanthi. Thank you so much for
my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for enlightening us. And you'll be happy to know in the panel discussion to follow, we have common friends like Shankar, Venkateswaran.
Wonderful. Yeah. He's amazing. So it will be good, I think.
Yeah.
He hasn't joined in as yet.
I think he has joined. I think.
I've been listening to you, Vasanthi. I've been listening to you.
Okay. Good. Nice. Hey, I see Seema also.
Yeah, Seema is there. Seemaji is there.
Hi, Seema.
Hi, Vasanthi.
Good to see you.
Mr. Shivakumar from ITC is there.
Oh, I see. Hello.
Hi, hello.
And Mr. Santanu Roy, for Executive Director of GAIL, is with us also.
Oh, wonderful. Nice. I'll stay in for a little while and listen to them and then head out. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Most welcome.
So we are starting the second
Yes.
session of the conference, and it's nice to see old friends across, thanks to the platform called Zoom. We are zooming on each other. So thank you very much for joining us on this panel. And for the honors of introducing the panel, I would like to request my friend and colleague, Professor Sanjay Mukherjee, to do the honors.
Yeah, good afternoon or good evening to all of you, esteemed panelists. The second panel for this Suscon 8 2021. I am Shillong. And as we have already discussed and agreed upon, we have a certain flow in our mind to follow during this conversation. So we begin with Seema ji. Seema Arora is the Director General of CII, Confederation of Indian Industry, and is the head of the CII-ITC, Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development. So thank you, Seema ji, for complying with our request. So Seema ji will begin her inputs on the macro issues related to sustainability challenges in business. Madam.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the generous introduction. Just minor correction. I'm not the Director General of CII. I am the Deputy Director General, one of the Deputy Director General. That's just a correction. So thank you for inviting me. And I also want to wish my esteemed panelists, all of them very, very, have great experience. So I'll be very short. And as was mentioned, I will just give a very brief overview. I believe this is the fourth day of the conference. A lot must have already been said about the issue of sustainability. And maybe I would just briefly mention from a business point of view what we are seeing from CII and the CII-ITC Center, as was mentioned, which we have specially created within CII to work with businesses to mainstream sustainability and embed sustainability into the business models of organizations. I think it's everybody knows that the challenge of sustainability is getting manifested in various ways, and the one way that we see it very strongly is and which we are seeing right now also in our country is through the various weather patterns and the extreme weather events that we are seeing, and these are happening globally as well. And just to give you a figure, in 2019, these extreme weather events, which were attributed mainly to climate change, caused at least $100 billion in damages to the world. So, and this is expected that these damages by 2050 may reach almost $8 trillion. So this is the kind of risk, the kind of challenge that the globe faces. And most of these risks would, of course, come to the society as a whole, but definitely to the business community. And I think that's what we would probably be discussing today with, in this panel. Also, the World Economic Forum has a global risks perception report and has ranked climate change and related environmental issues among the top 5 risks. And basically, this is something which is now getting global attention, as we know. And if we look closer home in India, I think the challenge is even much more grave because India is much more vulnerable. You would have heard about it. And again, just a few data points here for everybody to maybe take forward as we go in this panel discussion. It's estimated that almost if there is a 1 meter rise in sea level because of climate issues, almost 7.1 million people in India will get displaced. And you can imagine the kind of challenge that will throw up. We saw the kind of challenge COVID threw up in terms of the disruption it caused for society, for businesses, for humanity at large. And if you could even just imagine for a minute, if 7.1 million people in India were to be displaced because of the sea level rise of 1 meter, what is the kind of disruption and challenges we will face? Because of this issue itself, climate issues, as we know, the temperature of the earth is going up. The mean temperature of Himalayas has gone up in the past 30 years by almost 0.6 degrees, resulting in warmer days. We are hearing every day of cloudbursts in the Himalayas itself. And these are also, of course, weather events, but also to some extent because of the climate issue. This will actually impact a lot of our economic activity. And just to give one example, it's expected that by 2050, there'll be 50% reduction in the wheat yield in the Indo-Gangetic plains itself because of the changes in the climate and the weather patterns that would be followed. So this is the kind of scenario that we have. Of course, the water crisis I'm not even talking about, because we all face that every day in our cities. Almost 21 major cities are expected to run out of groundwater by 2030, and we are in 2021 already. Now, how does this translate for business? And I think that's the important thing we are discussing. And I like to categorize the challenges and the risks that business face into 4 types of challenges for our discussion today. One, of course, is the physical risks and the challenges associated with it. And I discussed some of them earlier by giving some pointers, which is really the increased physical risk of increased cyclones, floods, destroying the production facilities themselves, climate variability affecting the crop production, etc. So supply chains getting disrupted. Physical risks are there. There's also the transition risk because of all these, changes that are happening in all of these developments. Policy makers are responding differently, and you have regulation and policy changes that are happening. And these are the transition risks. So business would invest thinking in mind that this investment would give them the returns over a period of time. But then there are, policy changes such as, carbon taxes, for example, or newer carbon pricing, or net zero targets, which we are hearing of. And these, again, are challenges that businesses has to now factor in when they're actually planning any investments, when they're planning any kind of new businesses as well. A major part of the risk that business faces and challenges that business face because of all these sustainability issues is also market access issues. More and more, if we look at, and we all also in COVID realize, that supply chains are really important. And we've seen that there's renewed focus on supply chains. And there's also renewed focus on now sustainability in the supply chain. And we see that a lot of markets, especially markets in developed countries, are now looking at how, they are looking at how they can levy certain kinds of taxes, even carbon taxes at the border. They call that carbon border adjustment mechanism, which can really make sure that if they have levied certain charges on companies within their borders, where that is within their countries, the people who are importing into the country, the industry doesn't have an undue advantage by being able to pollute in the country where they are bringing the material from. So that's the balancing that they are trying to do. What that means is that if, for example, we make steel in India and we have certain norms that we follow while making steel, and there's an embedded carbon there, there's also, if that steel is going into any product in EU, there could be a possibility of a tax being levied before that steel can be imported to balance out the embedded carbon component. So these are the kind of things that are happening. These are real market access risks. There's, of course, risk, such talks also around nature conservation, and therefore deforestation-free supply chains are being talked about. And finally, the risk that we see is the major risk of finance, and access to finance is getting, limited. I think a lot of you would have, read about a quote in Netherlands saying that, Shell has to, Shell, which is the global, oil and gas company, has to advance this GHG, reduction targets. Otherwise, they will have to pay for, certain fines for it. Similarly, EU has decided that they will stop funding oil and gas and coal projects by end of 2021, which is by the end of this year, cutting almost pounds, almost 1.7 billion euros of yearly investments. So this is the kind of, landscape that is developing. Just to give you a few examples, you've heard of probably, the California wildfires. You've heard of the deadly bushfires in Australia. The business impact of these has been the Pacific Gas and Electric Company in California has actually filed in 2019 for bankruptcy, for climate change bankruptcy. This is probably the first case of a company filing for climate change bankruptcy as a result of wildfires, causing liabilities of almost $30 billion. And Australia's bushfires led to, cheesemakers struggling to secure milk supplies, and insurance claims rose. So these are real risks that are coming to business. Back home in India, it is, we all know that, a lot of the, places where there is less water or the water scarcity comes in the summer months, a lot of companies have to close operations, and they have to either manage to get their own water or close operations. So this is real, that is a business impact that is happening. And just to put some numbers on it, we are in the monsoon season, and we saw that Maharashtra has broken the 100-year record of rainfall. In fact, Mumbai's frequent flooding from 2005 onwards results in a loss of $6 billion every year. It's a proven figure that is there, and it's likely to reach $1 trillion annually by 2030. The annual frequent flooding that happens. Cyclone Amphan, which happened last year in the eastern region, was one of the most expensive cyclones in the region, costing us $11.5 billion. So this is the real challenge that businesses are facing, and key messages that I just want to end by, end my talk by giving is that, essentially all these challenges should lead to businesses internalizing these sustainability risks into their critical, risk assessment. And that is the need of the hour. And I know that colleagues from business who are there will talk about how they do it. And they need to take leadership in actually, finding solutions, because while businesses, some of the businesses, as have a huge sustainability environmental footprint, which is negative, I strongly believe that the solutions also come from businesses. And that is what I think, as the CII-ITC Center, we have been working with companies to show them how they can convert these challenges into opportunities. How can they actually work on solutions? How can they, build resilience in their, value chains? And how can they actually go towards, carbon neutrality through decarbonizing renewable energy? How can they adopt nature-based solutions and circular economy to minimize their footprint, etc.? So, and all these actions actually, and we will have the examples coming from business soon, these inclusive business actions can actually generate millions of livelihoods and can create also, opportunities for other businesses. And I think, therefore, while there is a challenge in this whole sustainability issue, and the session is titled Sustainability Challenges for Business, I think there's an equal opportunity for businesses. And we need to see how we how do we manage to convert these challenges into the opportunities and find a growth path. And I'll end here. Thank you. Back to you, Professor Mukherjee.
Thank you very much, Seema ji, for your detailed presentation of the macro issues and challenges. We have with us the second speaker, who has been known to IIM Shillong for long, was known to me personally for long, Sri Shankar Venkateswaran. He is the co-founder of ECube Climate Finance at present. Formerly, he was the Chief of Sustainability of Tata Sons. And presently, he's also the chairperson of Oxfam India. It was way back in 2000, September, that we came to know each other at probably the first CSR conference in South Asia, in Asian Institute of Management, Manila. So since time is short, I won't go into a detailed introduction. My senior alumnus from IIM Calcutta, Shankar Venkateswaran, please, floor is yours. Shankar.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Sanjeev. Good afternoon, students. It's great to be here. Also, greetings to my good old friend Seema, and hi, Shivakumar. It's been a long time since we met. Good to see you on the panel. I think we've off to a great start, because Seema has actually put out the big issues that that we are all facing, and not just business. All of us as individuals are also facing the same issues. And it was interesting in terms of the way Seema highlighted how businesses specifically get impacted by this. I'm going to just take this a little further in terms of how the businesses see this as a challenge and why they see it as a challenge. And I'm again going to speak at a slightly high level, leaving it to colleagues like Shivakumar to speak more at a very specific sectoral level, because he has that depth of experience. So I'm going to be at a very high level. And I'm going to base a lot of it on the work. I've been working in this space for the last 15 odd years. I have worked with several companies as a consultant. Have been with the Tata Group, and I'm just going to consolidate all of that and try and put these in terms of 6 specific challenges that companies face in terms of sustainability. Now, it's interesting that you can interpret sustainability challenges as, how does sustainability pose a challenge, and is sustainability in itself, what is the kind of challenge it provides to companies? And I'm going to try and, in some senses, weave both that in. I think the first challenge that companies have understood from thinking about sustainability is just in terms of how business success is defined and what impacts business success. Now, if you ask any CEO, and I've asked many of them, what does business success mean? What are your indicators of business success? It would be a combination of 3 things, typically. It would be about profits and profitability. It would be about growth, and it would be about longevity, being around forever. You know, Tata Group has been around for 150 years, and so on and so forth. Of course, these 3 parameters are interrelated. If you are profitable and you continue to grow, you can continue to live forever. But basically, that's how they understand business success. Most CEOs would understand business success or define business success. In fact, most CEOs would, if you ask them what is sustainability, this is what they would say 15 years ago. But that has changed significantly. What has changed is as follows. The factors that contribute to these 3 indicators have changed dramatically in the last 15, 20, 25 years. The factors that impacted profits, profitability, growth, and so on in the past is traditionally what we are taught in the business schools. It's traditionally what I was taught in the business school, what many of us are taught in the business school. It's about finance, managing capital. It's about managing human resources. It's about markets and market share and products and innovation. And if you get all of these right, you have a business that does all these 3. But what has profoundly changed in the last 15 years is that these parameters that we are talking about have almost become hygiene. And a whole bunch of new factors have come in, and Seema has talked about them in great detail. I mean, who 15 years ago would talk about climate change? But climate change impacts the future of business. You can't avoid thinking about climate change as something that will impact the future of business. You have to understand that there are natural resources, especially non-renewable natural resources like metals, ores, and so on, are going to be scarce. In fact, there is a very interesting version of the periodic table that the American Chemistry Society has published, where they actually color code the elements based on how much longer you will find them on the Earth. And you will find a lot of them are not going to be around in 100 years because we're just going to use them up. So what has changed in the last 15, 20 years is not how you measure business success, but what are the parameters that impact them. And a lot of these parameters are what we call sustainability parameters. And I think that's what has changed in terms of understanding business success. So CEOs of today understand that if you don't manage a whole bunch of sustainability issues, your business is not going to be profitable, it's not going to grow, and it's certainly not going to therefore live forever. And that's one challenge that companies are trying to see. Okay, how do I understand these parameters, and how do I manage them, and how do I deal with these parameters? So that's the first. The second is, what are these parameters? And as I said, Seema has talked about some of them, and I'm not going to add to that. I just talked about resource scarcity. Seema referred to pollution, but I think there are a whole bunch of social issues that are also very important. The whole issue of inequality, for me, is a really big issue. And as the world becomes more and more unequal, and I'm not going to quote numbers at you because it's fine to show it in a slide, but otherwise it's overwhelming. But if you look at the Credit Suisse produces what is called a wealth report every year, where they produce a wealth pyramid, and you will see figures like the number of that less than 1% of the world's population owns about 45% of the global wealth. You see that kind of inequality, and you see that inequality growing. Oxfam, we produce an inequality report every year. We release it at the World Economic Forum. And that, again, continues to show how the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. And in fact, we call it, the last year's report showed how the pandemic actually actually exacerbated the gap between the rich and the poor. So when you have an unequal world, you're going to have a lot of turbulence around. And to sort of work in that turbulence is not going to be the way, it's not going to be easy to run a business. So understanding these factors is getting more and more complex. So there is climate change, there is resource scarcity, there's pollution, there's inequality. And of course, the fifth, which many of us who work in the development sector always knew, but came out in the pandemic, is the level of informalization of labor that we have in this country. Many of those informal labor are migrant workers. What is an informal labor? An informal worker is one who has absolutely no social security. There is no safety in the way he or she works. There is no guarantee of wages. Forget living wages that Vasanthi was talking about. There is not even minimum wages paid. I mean, everything that is potentially wrong in any kind of a working environment exists in the informal sector. And informalization has been increasing because business models have increasingly started looking at outsourcing as a way of cost cutting. And as you go beyond the first and the second tier supply chain, you have no visibility as to what is happening over there. And the government sector is a classic example, is the first big example of what is happening in supply chains and the level of informalization. So you have the Rana Plaza fire of 2013 in Bangladesh, where all the well-known brands who follow all the ethical principles, they were sourcing from those from factories that were housed in Rana Plaza in Dhaka, where thousands of workers died. So the parameters that now define this, companies are trying to understand them. Companies are trying to come to grips with them and know that there are both environmental issues, which is the easier one, but there are also social issues that impact business success. So that's the second piece that companies are grappling with. How do I understand this? How do I know what is relevant for me? What is, in the technical jargon, what is material to my business? That's the second challenge. The third challenge is the way stakeholders and the role that stakeholders are playing. And it's, in fact, interesting. 2019, in many ways, was a watershed year from a stakeholder thinking perspective, because it was around 50 years since Milton Friedman had talked about the centrality of the shareholder. But in 2019, the CEO Roundtable, which is a part of, which is a grouping in the US of all the big CEOs of large companies, actually went and said that the purpose of an organization is to look at its impact on its stakeholders. it threw out the shareholder centrality of a business and said we need to look at stakeholders. Now, it is stakeholders that are pushing all these agendas. Who's pushing the inequality agenda? Who's pushing the resource scarcity agenda? It is all these bunch of stakeholders. And you have, I would say, broadly two kinds of stakeholders. One are what I would call the traditional stakeholders. These are the stakeholders that companies always listen to and listen to very carefully. The first, of course, is the investor, somebody the company has to take seriously. Second is the regulator. And third is the customer. So the stakeholders, these three stakeholders have always been there, but these three stakeholders are asking different questions of companies. If in the past, the investor was only concerned about returns on his investment, now the huge question that investors are asking and worried about is risk. And they recognize that sustainability is one of the biggest causes of risk of their investment. So investors are not concerned about sustainability out of goodness of heart. In fact, my story I've heard and repeated many times is one investor once told me that there are two emotions that guide an investor. One is greed and the other is fear. Greed is about getting greater returns and fear is about getting no return. And it's the fear that's driving their push towards sustainability because they fear that their investment is just going to go down the tube if their investee company doesn't take sustainability seriously. So the question they're asking is different. They're not just saying, okay, tell me how much am I going to get in terms of return? What have you done in the last quarter? But what are you doing about sustainability? Because that's a clear risk for them. The regulator is getting more and more serious. And again, Seema referred to that. And there's plenty of evidence of that around. If you look at things like extended producer responsibility, if you look at all the kinds of emission-related regulations that have come in the last decade or so, if you look at what's happening in terms of plastic waste, if you look at the impact that the climate change, the Paris Agreement and SDGs have had on public policy and laws, you can see that the regulations are also getting tighter. So regulators are bringing in more and more of these environmental and social issues into regulations. So companies are trying to now deal with the fact that this is going to happen to me. How do I predict what's going to happen and how do I manage it before it comes and hits me? Seema talked about carbon tax. So these kinds of things are coming at companies in different ways. So a whole bunch of environmental and social issues. Similarly, customers are not just asking the question. I mean, Indian customers might still be saying "kitna deta hai" as the mantra for what they buy, but that is also changing. And more and more customers are asking, how is this produced? What is happening in your supply chain? What do I do after I finish using the product? Do I just throw it into the dustbin? Is there some way of dealing with the toxicity of all the material that is in it? How do I clean up? So I think these traditional stakeholders are asking companies different questions, and if they don't like those answers, they're going to treat those companies differently. But the other stakeholders who have also been there are now getting more and more vociferous, stronger, and asking questions. Communities is a classic example. You would have seen in the last 10 years, there's far more active community response to companies' behavior than you would have seen before that. Before that, communities were actually not as active. But thanks to civil society, thanks to media, thanks to social media, communities are pushing the agenda. So managing all these set of complex stakeholders is really a big challenge. And that's the sort of third and fourth big challenge. Managing the traditional stakeholders and managing these new stakeholders who are getting stronger and stronger are the other two challenges that I want to talk to you about. The fifth challenge is that it's also very confusing for companies to understand, okay, I need to be sustainable. This is an important thing. But what does sustainability mean? What are the frameworks out there? How do I know that actually my way I behave is sustainable? Obviously, this is a question that needs an answer. And there are again a multitude of frameworks which can again cause its own set of confusions. The oldest sort of framework that sort of tried to define what sustainable behavior is called the triple bottom line, which some of you may have heard of. I'm not going to go into a long treatise on the triple bottom line. But what the triple bottom line essentially was trying to say is that the companies of the future will not be measured in terms of how they've done on the financial bottom line, but also how they have performed on the social and the environmental bottom line. So that is the traditional, that's the first sort of framework, but it's not an easy framework to practice. So what does that mean? Many companies practice it in different ways, but it's not an easy framework to grasp, to understand, and to practice. Then you have the UN Global Compact, which came out at the turn of this millennium, built on the Millennium Development Goals, Kofi Annan's gift to responsible business. It has a set of 10 principles that covers environment, social, human rights, governance. It tries to define what does a responsible business or what does a sustainable business mean. Then you have our own indigenous frameworks. You have something that came out in 2011, which was the National Voluntary Guidelines. You have something that came out in 2019, which is the National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct. All of these try to define what does it mean to be a responsible, to be a sustainable business. Then you have the SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which is based out of the US. They have a set of factors that define sustainable business. What constitutes that? Now, companies have to figure this out because there are so many frameworks. What does this mean? Which ones are the ones that are most appropriate for me? Then you have the SDGs themselves. Is that what I should be following? So there's a lot of stuff out there, and companies' challenge is to figure out which is the framework that I think suits me best. How do I use that framework? And related to the framework that you want to use to understand sustainable behavior is the sixth sort of challenge is how do I disclose my sustainable behavior? What is my disclosure framework that I use? Again, there are plenty of them. So how do I report on it? How do I disclose? How do I tell my stakeholders how I'm doing? You have, again, a whole range of them. You have the Global Reporting Initiative, you have the Integrated Report. These are generic ones. Then you have very specialized ones like the CDP, which talks only about carbon and water and forest and businesses' impact on that. You have the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. That requires a particular disclosure that companies have to make. Then you have the mandatory ones like the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report that SEBI has mandated for the top 1,000 listed companies. So again, you have a multitude of reporting frameworks, and challenge for companies is to figure out which is the one or the set of frameworks that sort of work for me. So I think that, that you have, as it is a very complex world that we live in, all of these complexities affecting your business, and so companies are grappling with trying to respond to that. And these are some of the six. These are basically, I think, the 6 challenges that companies see as top of their mind in trying to address and trying to become and trying to be more responsive to this kind of sustainability challenges. So I'm going to pause there, and in the next segment, we can talk about how companies are actually responding to this. So I'll pause there. Back to you, Shankar.
Thank you, Shankar, for a detailed exploration of the multiple macro level challenges the companies are facing with respect to sustainability. Now, from the macro issues that Seema ji and Shankar had covered, we now come to the sectoral challenges. We have two very senior company executives with us. We begin with Mr. S. Shivakumar, the Chief of ITC Agro and IT sector. Mr. Shivakumar will now elaborate us, enlighten us on the challenges from the agricultural sector point of view. Sir.
Thank you, Sanjay. Good evening, friends. So between Seema and Shankar, we have a good canvas of sustainability challenges that the world is confronting. So let me pick up three of them and apply to agriculture sector, although some of that has already been mentioned in different ways. But first to look at the task in front of agriculture sector. Among other things, most crucial is producing food for the world. You know, in another 30 years, we'll be about 9 billion people. And there's one estimate which says that over these 30 years, the world will have to produce almost as much food as we have ever produced after agriculture was invented over the last over 8,000 years. So you can look at the size of the task that is involved and the scale of production that is required. Now, if that's the task, how some of these challenges impact. We heard quite extensively about the climate change, the extreme weather episodes which have become more frequent, whether it is unseasonal rains, often even seasonal rains, which leads to flooding. Then, of course, more frequent droughts and heat waves and forest fires elsewhere in the world. So all of these obviously have serious implication on the production and yields of agricultural crops. It's primarily weather-dependent activity, and barring climate-controlled agriculture, which is a small fraction and much more expensive than open-to-sky field agriculture, this production risk is sizable. Just as an example, Seema already talked about the potential loss in wheat, almost 50% lower yield in our own Indo-Gangetic plains, which is otherwise rich in production of wheat. And similarly, every other crop has anywhere between 20 to 60% kind of potential yield losses. But in addition to yield losses, what we are also seeing because of the unseasonal rains and extended heat waves is the quality loss. Standing crop, farmer is extremely happy that the crop is just ready for harvest, and then there's heavy rain and there is a huge loss of quality that occurs. So both of these obviously would mean rise in risk and consequently rise in insurance premium. And at various national levels, this would also mean increasing dependence on imports more often than before if other regions of the world are producing. So I think this is one aspect, climate change and implications on agriculture, and given the larger task of how much more we need to produce. The second piece is the natural resource that again has been mentioned extensively. Now, as we speak, in a matter of 2 or 3 more days, we will cross what is called the Earth Overshoot Day, which basically means next week we are going to exhaust all resources that will be renewed by 31st of December this year. That means rest of the 5 months, we actually stolen those resources from our children and their children. What it means for agriculture, the most key of these natural resources is water. Then, of course, there's an element of topsoil, the carbon content in that soil, and so on. But if we just pick up water, there has also been talked about. Now, agriculture consumes about 90% of fresh water resource of India. I mean, India as it is vulnerable because we are 17% of all people of the world, but only 4% of the world's water resource. And if you are consuming our water resource like there is no tomorrow and exhausting that, then obviously it will mean water not being available for critical irrigation and growing crops. More than 50% of all the country is already categorized as severely water stressed in terms of the groundwater that is available. So implications of natural resource depletion faster than we are able to renew is the second key implication on agriculture. And let me also pick up the social dimension, which has also been mentioned in terms of economic inequality that has severe social implications. In India, half of all the workforce has agriculture as a source of livelihood, the primary source of livelihood. And things like what percentage of world assets are owned by how many people may be a distant statistic. But if you just look at the per capita income of a farmer in India, that is much closer home. If you look at the GDP as a surrogate, 50% of all people are relying on agriculture, and the contribution of agriculture to GDP is just 15%. And the rest of the 85% of the GDP is contributed by the other 50% of the workforce and other resources that are deployed. And which basically means the per capita GDP is just about 1/5 of the rest of us. Now that's what leads to the extreme inequality. And barring the farmers, you also have labor who also don't have that land as well. Their incomes are even lower. And Shankar talked about the informal sector and labor. And so I think the statistics that talk about the level of incomes there are even more extreme. So I think this is again a very unsustainable situation. So I think when you zoom in some of these broader issues to agriculture as a sector, this is what we see. And obviously from the business perspective, the implications are that if water doesn't last more than a few years for growing crops, therefore obviously implications of businesses relying on agriculture as raw material or food as an end product are for us as individuals. When you look at food, I think all of these are the challenges that we need to grapple with. And then increasingly, as we see the unsustainability of fossil fuels, we see that the same land resource and water resource will need to be used possibly for biofuels as well. And therefore, there are other demands on the same natural resources, which further aggravate this issue. So that's where I'll stop in terms of showcasing what the issues are. And then we'll deal with how the various companies are dealing with that in the next section.
Thank you, Mr. Shivakumar, for your inputs from the agricultural sector. And now we have the final panelist with us, Mr. Santanu Roy, Executive Director at GAIL, Gas Authority of India Limited, a person known to me since the year 1968, January, from class 1 in St. Lawrence High School, Calcutta, and then in Jadavpur University, Mechanical Engineering. It's been a long relationship. Shantanu, the floor is yours now. From the energy sector.
Thank you, Sanjay. I think I will primarily try to address the students. I was just trying to imagine if I were on the other side and listening to these three great luminaries, my head would have been ruling that it's better not to go to business at all. Please don't be so afraid. Life is tough, but that's what makes us. Okay, let me try to give a small background why energy sector. I don't know why Sanjay has selected energy sector, but let me try to give you. Energy sector is only contributing roughly about 2.7% of the India's GDP and 69% of emission. I think that gives a perspective that why taking care of energy sector per se is so critical. And who else other than you young people who can take care of it? I'll try to give, without getting into too many numbers. Unfortunately, energy sector deals with a lot of numbers, but I'll try to give you only a bird's eye view and the real issues. The first thing that would come to our mind is how it's almost an axiom that whenever a country tries to increase its GDP, the energy increases. That's very clear. But how to, if not totally recess it, but at least decouple so that one moves at the speed of Rajdhani, other moves at the speed of passenger train. So that is what the first challenge I would think for all of you to think. And no better than if a small figure would possibly tell you. Let me consult my notes a bit. Per capita, yes. India is already, you must be knowing, sixth in terms of GDP. It is going to be third in GDP and already second in terms of total absolute energy, absolute carbon intensity. And the energy consumption is going to get up from 5.8 to 8%. So this is where the first challenge lies, that how to decouple the growth, how to make sure that our GDP increases, but not the concurrent energy consumption per se. So the energy consumption per se, if it increases, then it is a very highly dangerous situation. How dangerous? That brings us to the second issue, that decarbonizing the economy. We have all heard about this very fancy term, but unfortunately the road that Indian energy sector, Indian young Indians like you have to travel is very difficult because of the very simple reason that there is hardly any carbon space available. I'll try to be very, very simple in saying that carbon is one thing that cannot be destroyed. It is actually engulfing the entire universe of ours. The amount of possibly carbon that was produced even 10,000 years back, there's a lot of calculation which goes into saying it takes about 15,000 years to go by back some minuscule person. So what happens actually, the available space that carbon can be emitted further is less and less. So this is something that we have to be very clear. And India is already number 2 in the world, I have told you. The third thing that obviously is of importance to us is the energy justice. We have all heard about this term, very fancy term, but 1.3 billion people, and how many of it are so lucky to be spending this time connected through the internet and all that. Many people, millions of people are not having any access to the electricity at all. So many households, I'm not getting into the numbers, all of you can Google it. I'm sure you can do much better than me and find out the numbers. How many of us are not having basic access to electricity? Even when electricity is there, there is a simple pole and the light is not there. So it is not only the access, the affordability, all that will come. We'll see how this affordability, there are 4 A's which really define the energy justice. I think I cannot go better than this when I say that a very beautiful quotation from Ban Ki-moon, who was the previous United Nations Secretary General. I'll just try to say that because I have never found something better than this. Sustainable energy is the golden thread that connects economic growth, social equity, a stable climate, and a healthy environment. I'll repeat it once again because it's a very loaded statement, but very beautifully written. Sustainable energy is a golden thread that connects economic growth, social equity, a stable climate, and a healthy environment. So, friends, if you are anywhere in the world, wherever the world takes you after your graduation, you cannot be out of energy. There is not a single day, single moment in your life that you do that. So we have to make it sustainable. So with that overall picture of the energy sector. I think let me try to cover a bit about the business. Time is short. I think that's what I would like to say. Is just 1 more minute, please. Whereas 35% of India's energy comes from hydrocarbon. You know about hydrocarbon, which is primarily coal and all the, other than the coal, oil and gas, basically. India's dependence on import in dollar terms is increasing. This is something we must have seen when I was a young boy. We could see that even 5% increase in the petrol price used to create so much of trouble that burns in Kolkata. Nowadays, almost every single day there is prices increasing, and we are just mute spectators. So this is where the in dollar terms, if we see, the oil import bill was 112 billion in FY19. It went slightly down because of COVID last year, and it is already expected to reach $150 billion in India. Just see what is the percentage in terms of our GDP. So a large percentage of our GDP that we produce goes in the oil import bill. The second factor that I would like to bring in here, even if, okay, we are not having hydrocarbons, so what are we trying to do? We are seeing a highly skewed utilization factor of our energy sector. Whereas we have got 380, 290 gigawatt of energy capacity available in India. The maximum that we require, it touched very recently in the month of July only, 197. So plain simple mathematics shows that 50% of our capacity is underutilized. And out of that, if you see the natural gas, which is the best out of the hydrocarbon, the utilization factor is not even touching 10%. In terms of coal, which was originally about 70%, 2 decades back, we are now about 55%. Can a almost underdeveloped country like India afford to do this? Because what is whatever resources we have got, we must optimally utilize it. So it's very fine. We are seeing a lot of things you must have read that about renewable energy, which is creating a huge impetus to India to tell to the outside world that yes, we are achieving our target. Okay, think about it. India requires a huge jump, quantum jump. We have made very good progress in renewable energy, and if we want to continue for another 10 years to reach the level that is already declared, some 280 odd gigawatt, what happens? I'll tell you only one figure that would possibly help you to understand. That in 1920, the import of solar wafer cells, modules, and investors was already at $3 billion. Meaning thereby, if the import is stopped today, we are nowhere in the renewable energy. And against a target of more than 30 gigawatt of production of installation every year, we are having indigenous capacity of only 3 gigawatt manufacturing in India. So are we having a dream that may not realize? Are we having a pathway that we will never be able to achieve? This is where the challenge lies. And the challenge, I'll be very, very honest with you. Almost every week I see, or in fact, it is now in days sometimes, that a new unicorn is coming up. All of you must have seen, all of you must be feeling very great. Yes, startups are doing very well. Think for a minute. Have you heard a single unicorn in the energy sector? And I've tried to start with the saying that how important is the energy sector. How many of the young engineers, young technocrats that are coming out are working in the field of sustainable energy? And if we do not have sustainable energy, believe me, all the world is going to crumble. We need energy to move, and we need to make it sustainable. We need to make it a decarbonized way of doing things. If we do not do that, then nothing is going to happen. Let's talk a bit about, because time is short, I'll be trying to say something which is very close to my heart, the energy justice. It first of all starts with affordability. how much of energy that we are making is affordable. Yes, we are very happy that we are getting the renewable energy, solar energy now going at about 2 rupees 2 paise, which was more than, I think, the first time I won a job for GAIL way back in 2009, what was 9 rupees 50 paise or something. So that has come down, that's very fine. But I try to again tell you, it's not really going to remain accessible to all. If you go to the interior of any state, I can assure you, you go to, you see a single light post, and there, as per government terms, it is known as the state is, that particular village is electrified. How many hours of uninterrupted, reliable electricity are we able to provide? We are not able to provide. So this brings us the accessibility problem, the affordability problem. Last but not the least, I'll end with that because we have to hear to so many others. We are all accountability. The last stage, which is most important, is the accountability, the adaptability. And young people, persons like you can change the world. That's why I was so very eager to address you. I'm very happy to address how we are taking some actions. The industry is coming up with certain innovative solutions. Not always possible, but yes, we are trying. Thank you. Over to you, Sanjay.
Yeah. Thank you all the four esteemed panelists for this, elaborate discussion on the challenges. Well, we have our challenge is to manage the time now. Well, may I request my co-chair and esteemed colleague, Professor Sanjeev Kahuti, to carry on with the later part of the discussion and conclude the program. Yes.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. Actually, you couldn't have expected a better panel. The width of the discussions and the depth of it was certainly staggering. So one thing that we have been discussing in class this morning is the difference between being reactive and being responsive. And sometimes, as a teacher of sustainability, I feel that businesses have been more reactive than responsive to the question of sustainability, climate change, and other things. Now, there is a reason I say this, and I hope to set the cat among the pigeons by saying so that we could have a churn of ideas. If you look at the top 100 economies of the world, 69 are corporations. The top 20 MNCs have a combined turnover that is higher than the GDP of the 100 poorest countries. Now, climate change is a reality that's facing us. And are we looking at climate change in terms of the difficulties it will cause, the challenges it will pose to business? When Mr. Shivakumar was talking about farmers and all that, I couldn't help but imagine the farmers who've been out on the streets and camping Delhi for their set of things. Now, I was also thinking of corporations lobbying with government successfully for policy changes in a number of ways. Now, if we look, because there is no doubt, starting with Seema Arora's presentation about climate change, going into Shankar's articulation, going into Shivakumar's, and then finally ending up with a very, very candid kind of a presentation by Santanu Roy. There is no doubt that all of us are aware of what's happening. What do we do about it? What can we do about it? I will just recount, I was invited to the World Economic Forum and I was supposed to talk about globalization. And the evening I landed, we were talking about a whole lot of things. And in the night, I changed my presentation to create a need, create a world that respects diversity, globalization versus diversity. And it started off a flutter. Now, the thing that I would want to ask, and I would again go down in the same order in which you spoke, is that can we do more? Should we set the pace? Because business has both the muscle and the finances to set government policies in place. It is not just about compliance, it is about setting the standards. And if governments are not doing it, corporations have the ability to do it. So shall we set the new laws, the new rules of the game? And can it come from corporate? Starting with you, Madam Seema.
Well, thank you. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Of course, the pace has to be accelerated. We need to do more. And I'm proud to say that a lot of our members in CII are already doing more, but can do much more. In terms of the, the context when you mentioned about, pushing government for greater action, I think that is where we need to also push action a little bit more, because, as if we were to just talk of only climate issues itself, there is definitely now, from many countries in the world, a deadline by when they would become, as they call, net zero as a country. Of course, India cannot follow the same path as the developed economies, but I think having a target in India would be very important, because then it will drive everybody to take action. So it can be, it can be based on what India can do and the timeline, when we should be actually, doing it. But I think at the moment, we in India are not even committing that. And I think that is an area where much more could be done. Businesses are committing. In fact, to answer your question, we have, like I said, a lot of businesses are committing. Again, it's very hard for businesses to do. It's not easy, because it means you will have to, change the way you operate. You'll have to change your business structures, the way you are running your businesses, maybe give up some businesses as well. So I think it's hard, but I see businesses are taking that challenge. And I firmly believe that private action leads public policy. And I think that's what always I have seen, that if private sector or the business sector shows the way that it's possible, and in the CII-ITC Center, that's exactly what we do. We actually have voluntary programs around all of these areas that we talked of. We have a climate action charter, we have an India Plastic Pact, we have India Business Biodiversity Initiative, we have a Clean Air Forum for CEOs, where the enlightened, and I mean, the CEOs who understand, and Shankar mentioned, who discuss these challenges and know that this is the way forward, actually come together and then take on action collectively and individually and show that it's possible. And then also talk to the government and other stakeholders that how at the ecosystem level we can make changes so that this can be mainstream. Now, this is easy to say and very hard to do, but I think there is a way to do it, and we can have many more people take more action. I think that's the way to go forward. Thank you.
I would come to Shankar next. How do we change the vision of corporations from compliance to leadership?
Yeah, that is a $1 million question. And I think what I would just, in fact, take off from where Seema left. I think what is happening is, and this is typical of how any human system operates, I believe. I think you will always have leaders who will, by definition, do what needs to be done. Not necessarily out of a philanthropic mindset, but because they do, but also because they see that they are able to see the future better. So some of them, and that's why they are leaders, they're not looking behind. They're like Usain Bolt. They're not saying who's coming second. They are just, the finish line is very clear to them. So you will always have leaders who do that, who know that this needs to be done. It is important for my business. For me to be successful, for me to be living forever, I need to do this. And so leadership in itself brings that level of proaction. And to me, sustainable.
There seems to be a connectivity issue with Shankar.
Yeah, Shankar, you're there.
You need laws to also
Your voice has become intermittent, Shankar, if you can hear me. Should we, in the interest of time, I would like to go over to Mr. Shivakumar, and if when Shankar's connectivity becomes better, maybe we go back to him. So one thing that I have always believed in is that we human beings didn't go out of the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. There was a paradigm shift. And so what happens is there is this need for the paradigm shift now. Shantanu Roy would rue the fact that most of our energy is dependent on fossil fuels. So we need to bring about a paradigm shift. But what we have seen in the last almost 200 years since the Industrial Revolution is that that paradigm shift has not come. We have just tweaked with the system. ITC came up with the e-Chopal, which was a game changer in a lot of ways, but that's it. I mean, after that, what? We are running out of groundwater, fresh water. After that, what? So how do we bring about that paradigm shift, which if we don't do it, climate change will force us?
Yeah. So let me build on where Shankar left in terms of instead of looking at some of the sustainability agenda as one of philanthropy or spends out of profits, but pick it up as central to business strategy. I mean, that's the path that ITC took about 25 years ago. And that's the reason ITC has been water positive, carbon positive, solid waste recycling positive, and supporting nearly 6 million livelihoods for over 15 years after this agenda is taken. Now, how do we get the paradigm shift as the question, if one were to look at making use of examples of this kind and scaling it up very, very significantly, is the role of partnerships. There are two kinds of partnerships that I will illustrate. So one is the knowledge partnerships. For example, in the area of climate change, I talked about, water I talked about, livelihoods you already referred about e-Chopal, so I'll not touch on that as much as on climate change and water. So we had picked up a large-scale initiative on what is called the Climate Smart Villages in partnership with the CGI, the Central Agriculture Research of the World, their body called CCAFS, and taken up a pilot in 1,500 villages. It's a piloted scale, and created learning from within, from these villages, which are more resilient to climate and produced more despite weather shocks, and then transfer that knowledge for rest of the villages. Now, using that as the base, the next round of partnerships are now built with the governments to amplify. So that with the kind of scale and outreach that the government has, these 1,500 villages can, in the first instance, move to 15,000 villages and then to 150,000 villages in terms of scaling. So that's the second order partnership. So very similarly, in case of water, we started with rainwater harvesting as one route and partnered with NGOs to mobilize the farmers into groups and formed Water Use Association and enabled rainwater harvesting. As much as 1.2 million acres is irrigated over the time we started working on this. And right now the governments are coming to amplify. We just signed 2 months ago a project with the government of Karnataka. So what took 15 years for us to do 1 million acres, in 3 years' time, another 1 million acres will be done in partnership with Karnataka government, where we would operate as a research agency, bringing all the intellectual property that we built over these years. So very similarly on the demand side, water management, which is the lesson that we have learned in the last 3 years, is that with just about 1/4 of the area in terms of land acreage, we can create 5x in terms of water savings. So that is going to be taken up again in partnership. Knowledge partners there were various universities, agriculture universities. And again, amplification is with the help of government. So I think I would leave that thought with these illustrations, that partnerships are key for paradigm shifts, different kind of partnerships at different stages of the solutioning. And so I'm far more optimistic that we will find solutions at scale for the problem that we all talked about.
Right. So it's partnerships that's making the difference, and positive partnerships are so very important for us. As a teacher of so many things, I was looking at the partnership that was built up by successful corporate lobbies in the US, leading to wars in different parts of the world. The Iraq War is a prime example of corporate lobbying successfully with the government to go after non-existent weapons of mass destruction. I mean, anyway, but here we have in India, the examples of positive partnerships are so very important. And jocularly yesterday in a class, we were talking about the primacy of the energy supply for the models of development that we have built for ourselves. For instance, supposing we think of a smart city where the habitations are made in, say, blocks of buildings that are 30 stories high. Imagine living on the 30th story and there is no energy. You've got to walk up and down every time you need to go out, and then you need to carry up your water because there's no electricity to operate the pumps. The entire development model would come crashing down. And we have taken a position that energy is available and will be available in ever larger quantities, and from where and how we have not really thought about it. So that's where people like thinking people like Mr. Shantanu Roy are so very important. That is it a viable option for us to think of mini grids to ensure that the last mile connectivity of electricity is available in India? What are your thoughts on that, sir?
Thanks. While I would like to address your question first, if permitted, I would like to say a few more things because it's not very often that I get the opportunity of addressing the young minds.
We shall give you more opportunities in the time to come, sir. Don't you worry about
okay. First of all, since you asked about this distributed things, let me tell about a very unique thing that is happening. Government of India has come up with this scheme and it is currently on. 5,000 entrepreneurs are expected to put up plants which is under the SATAT scheme, which is a Sustainable Alternative Transport System. What it basically means, we all know that natural gas is possibly the best of the bad boys, meaning thereby it is having the least amount of carbon in amongst the hydrocarbons. But this, unfortunately, like most other hydrocarbons, we are not endowed with it. In fact, as per last account, we are importing more than 55% of our natural gas from abroad. And what happens is that there are only few ports in India which can bring in natural gas, and it is put into pipelines, and enormous amount of energy is, I would say, wasted in bringing that gas across various places so that we can use the natural gas. So if you see, we are using natural gas, but how much of energy has been wasted? So one thing that has come, and it is, we have to ultimately go for indigenous sources of energy. It is just not a viable option that we go on importing hydrocarbon or any other form of. Even for solar, I explained to you that we are so much dependent on our not so friendly neighbors that it is just not a viable option for very, very long time. Okay, so what has come up, the three schemes that have come up, one of which addresses this micro grid kind of thing is the SATA scheme, which basically is something called CBG, compressed biogas. And the compressed biogas, the major sources are the Bhadali, what you know, that the agricultural waste that comes out. In fact, there is the war goes on with the farmers. You know all that of how this is. So one of the major things is this. Second is the cattle waste, the chicken waste, and all that. The third and very important thing is the municipal solid waste. Municipal. So basically, what I'm trying to see is a model that the source is something which is not. I mean, this is something that we will be very happy to do away with. That's something very, very crucial. That it serves both purposes of serving you the energy, and it also takes away a lot of things that we do not want in our environment. So basic purposes of this and this technology is available in India and abroad, obviously. Of the technologies from abroad are possibly a bit better in terms of refining things, but overall technology is available in India. That's very, the source is available, technology is available. Let me come out the financing part of it. A small plant takes about 35 crores rupees, roughly, which brings you about roughly 5 tons of CBG per day, which is a small plant. And 35 crores, the government has gone way, whatever is possible in terms of very easy terms of getting your finances. You just need a very small amount of money to start this process. The process is already available in all in the websites of all the oil sector companies, including GAIL. You can set up anywhere in the world, anywhere in India, and a small amount of gas is produced. For what? This gas is produced so that it can act as an alternate to the CNG that you can think of. CNG par nature, okay, we are getting it at a cheaper rate. At the moment, the cost of CBG is high. So what has government done? Government has given it at a support price, which is already defined. This is the only support price that is available in the energy sector now. That for the next 2 years it is defined, and then the floor is defined. Meaning thereby that if you set up an industry, how many industries we can set up today in India, wherein you get the output price defined. This is only one of the few things. So I would say all the budding entrepreneurs that are your students, sir, please see the thing. Do not look only for the big companies. You can set up your own small setup. And the thing is that these are coming, and for the first few things, the assurance is being given that whatever gas you produce, we will be taking all that gas. I'll just give a rough figure because that would possibly help you. Whereas the natural gas would be available at, let's say, X rupees. Let's not talk about actual figure. The CPG that is produced is available would be 5x or 6x, but government has given you that support. So this is something, and out of 5,000 plants, more than 2,000 plants LOI have been issued. Almost 20 plants are already in operation. This is only one. And I had come up with the thing that I shall not talk about my company, but yes, okay, let me tell you only one small fact. After, because this was almost a personal challenge to me, after many visits, even during COVID, I was successful in getting a concession agreement signed with Ranchi municipality, wherein we are given 150 ton of municipal solid waste, and we are converting that into 5 ton of gas, which will go up, this is a scalable model, what I'm trying to say. So this is something that addresses it, where I'd like to say, where I've already addressed your question, 2 more initiatives, because these are important that the young students know about the initiatives in the alternatives that are happening. We are aware that this, because of these WTO considerations, the sugar export is going to be stopped. So a lot of ethanol is government is pushing for a lot of ethanol to be produced in India, primarily for ethanol blending, because ethanol per se gives you a little less energy, but it is definitely available to be made with technology available in India. This is, I would always say, and the raw material available in India. That is very essential that we go in for huge indigenization on our Atmanirbhar cannot only be in words. This is something that is also possible. It is taking shape, and big companies, okay, GAIL is also setting up, and believe me, the economics is good. Finally, I can see you are looking at the watch. So finally, yes, a lot of push is happening also on hydrogen, the cleanest fuel.
Right. I'm not sure whether Shankar has been able to join in.
Yeah. Shankar is here.
Mr. Shankar, you're back?
Yeah.
So,
yes, I am.
I'm so sorry that the internet played truant again. Trust it. But anyway, I think we need to always establish our superiority over technology and say that yes, technology can fail. So it kind of makes you feel superior. I know we are running short of time. So what I do is I will not go back to you from where you left off. Instead, there have been two hands that have been raised, and we will confine our questions to these two hands, Nikunj Kumar and Anisha. Anisha will go first because she was the one who had raised it quite a long time ago. And then maybe Mr. Shankar, you have the first go at the answer, even before the question is asked. Please go ahead, Anisha.
Yes. Good afternoon, esteemed panelists. So it has been really worthwhile to listen to such insightful discussions. And I have a question related to the agricultural sector. So basically, we have seen like how eChoupal has helped millions of farmers with technological and knowledge inputs. But during the COVID crisis, the small and marginal farmers are the most, like who have been suffering the most. So one is due to the logistics problems, and the second was is due to the rising input cost. So like other than the government providing solutions for the same, what can businesses do to help small farmers sustain during this tough times? Thank you.
Yeah, in the first instance, soon after the COVID hit last year and through the second wave this year, when ensuring distancing is maintained, hygiene conditions are maintained, the conventional mandis, obviously the crowded places that they are not safe. So as a result, a lot of procurement had to happen outside the mandis. So whichever state had their APMC acts reformed, the businesses, including many of those by ITC, have set up procurement centers and expanded procurement. Last year as well as this year, it is just about the Rabi harvesting time, and consequently farmers had to deliver produce and encash the produce. So that, so subject to policy reform, outside procurement can happen, and in any case that is more efficient. So that is one route which is taken. Similarly, from the point of view of crop advisory, a lot of action has happened now through digital means, very similar to the way we are interacting. The farmers have taken on quite quickly to several WhatsApp-based groups, and millions of farmers who are part of the network with us, both in eChoupal as well as part of our agriculture extension program with Niti Aayog in aspirational districts. So agricultural extension is also carried out digitally so that farmers are not suffering for lack of real-time information or knowledge in growing practices. Now, when it comes to the issue of input cost as another challenge that you specifically asked for, one kind of solution, obviously the government's direct benefit transfer is coming in handy as opposed to in-kind kind of subsidy. The role private sector can play and has been playing in wherever pockets that direct engagement reform has happened is by creating customized inputs based on soil testing and the local weather conditions, and using other technologies for early warning on things like pest attacks, so that the amount of input that is used is brought down, and which is both useful in terms of lowering cost as also in precision farming that leads to more sustainable production as well as safer food. So there are those kind of interventions which are also very much possible and are being done.
Yeah. Sanjeev? Hello.
Yeah, we are left with one question. Nikunj Kumar, if you can make it extremely brief and to the point.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, good evening, everyone. My question is to Shankar, sir, and it is related to SRS talk about the COVID inequality. So my question is, in the COVID, we have given the 3 reactions to the Indian COVID scenario. In the first reaction, those who are doing the white collar job, they are able to work from the home, while the other section of the working class are not able to do work from home, and they have hit the harder of COVID. In second phase, again in the when we are going with the unlock kind of situation, those who have the doing work from remotely, they are able to do work, and those who are doing a blue collar job, they have to go to their workplace, and they are in the touch of COVID. So in the third phase, we had a vaccination drive, and in that case also, in initial stage we managed well, but in the later stage, when it opens to all, corporate drive the COVID vaccination, and those who are able to get vaccination first, they get, and those are not able to get, they are still not able to get. So these three phases increase the inequality in society instead of filling that gap. So what's your reaction to this?
Well, it is a fact, but it is not a surprising fact. This is how inequality operates. It removes opportunities, and those who are worse off are always exposed. So I mean, I don't know what to say other than the fact that it is almost inevitable that this will happen, and this is why inequality is not a problem that only government should be dealing with, but everyone, all citizens, individual or corporate, need to address. It's as simple as that.
Right. I think with that, yes, I hand over to Sanjoy. Yeah.
No, I just thought that, because Shankar got split off from the main discussion, maybe a couple of 2-3 minutes to Shankar, because he has been teaching sustainability in IIM Shillong, IIM Calcutta. A few last words from Shankar would close up the discussion with
absolutely, sir. Absolutely. Mr.
Please.
Shankar, please.
Okay, so now you've put me in a spot, Sanjay. But no, I was just, let me just tie it up with what I was saying before I got disconnected. And I think in some senses might hopefully be of relevance to the students. So I was talking about corporate, that leaders in companies or leading companies playing the role in addressing some of the sustainability challenges. And I think I just want to tie it in with what Vasanthi was saying in the earlier session of what leadership is about. So leadership is not necessarily about people who are CEOs, but it's about assuming leadership. It's about trying to say that I understand the problem and I think that I can contribute to a solution. So I would seriously like students who are present here and at IIM Shillong to sort of take the understanding and the challenges of sustainability and assume leadership in the companies that they go to, and push for some of the kinds of actions that happen, so that it moves from just the incremental to the transformational, because incremental has only a limited value. You need to get to transformation. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and again, we spoke about this briefly in this session too, in terms of what causes huge changes in a system. And the one thing that does cause is disruptive companies that come with disruptive products, disruptive processes, and so on and so forth. And if you just take two examples of say Tesla, which completely disrupted the electric vehicles market, because it is difficult, if not impossible, and I would be happy to be corrected by Shantanu here. It is almost impossible for an incumbent to talk about making changes in the way their businesses operate. It is impossible for an automotive company that's wedded to the internal combustion engine to actually move to an electric vehicle. You need a disruptor. Similarly, if you look at the issue of resource scarcity and you look at an answer to resource scarcity, one of the huge answers that are coming about in terms of resource scarcity is how to convert a product into a service, so that you don't have to necessarily produce more as long as the service is available. And the best example of that is Uber. The product is actually what you're looking for is transportation. Now, transportation in the old days was converted into a product called a car, but actually what you're looking for is transportation. And so what Uber did is to disrupt that whole thinking that the only way you can transport is either by public transport or private transport means you have to own a vehicle. And when you own a vehicle and more people want to own vehicles, there's going to be more production, more steel, more energy consumed, and so on and so forth. So that is again a disruption. So again, I'm taking this as an example for young, those of you who you don't have to then, you can assume leadership in a company, or you could get into something which is completely disruptive as a startup. And all of those are ways by which you can actually change this equation of what the sustainability challenges are sort of getting faced. So I would put that as a challenge to you students of how, when you get out of IIM, you can play either of these two roles depending on the pathway that you think is appropriate for you. So I'll pause there and hand it back to Sanjeev and Shankar.
Thank you. It was a lovely summing up. Actually, I was kind of very hopeful of creating partnerships because the challenges before us are large, extremely large. Sustainability as a challenge, climate change as a challenge, and probably nobody working alone would be able to achieve it. And in this panel, we have got experts and people with the experience and the clout, starting from ITC to GAIL to CII to Oxfam, you name it, you have it. And we could kind of come in as a partner here, and we think of solutions to some of the problems along with the help of our students. We have students from 24 states of India in this group. And on Saturday, we are having a session where we are trying to identify some of the issues that concern the young. There is a possibility that we will identify a number of projects in different states that could be worked on. And there is also a possibility, sirs and madam, that we will reach out to you for guidance and support to execute those problems that would affect the lives of the less privileged. On that hopeful note of cooperation and working together in the future, I'm also happy to tell you that as a token of our appreciation and love for all of you, and as an honor from our side, we have planted saplings in your names in our new campus. And I would like to request our team to kindly share photographs of the sapling planted in each of your names. So when next time you come to Shillong, you'll be able to see a sapling growing up, and hopefully with the same ideals that you live your lives. Could we have the mementos, please? Achinda, are you there?
Yeah, he's there.
Sir, if you could let me know the
it would be, we start with Madam Seema Arora.
Yeah, definitely. So is the screen visible?
Yes. So this is for you, madam. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. They were lovely thoughts, and you placed the problem in its appropriate manner. Thank you very much. And this sapling is for you, ma'am.
Most grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So the next would be our very own Professor Shankar. He's come and taught so many times in IIM Shillong that we are eternally grateful. So thank you very much. This sapling is for you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to physically being there, hopefully the next time, next year. And actually, it'll be a great pleasure to go and water that sample. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So the next would be Mr. Shivakumar. Sir, what the ITC has done is remarkable. We talk about the ECube model in our classes, and we talk about so many good things that the ITC has done. And we thank you for whatever you're doing and for your time. Thank you, sir. This sapling is for you.
Thank you, Sanjeev and Sanjay. It's a great pleasure being here.
And last but not the least is the person that our Sanjay has known since 1968. That is quite something. This is for you, sir. Santanu Roy.
Thank you,
I'm
sir.
sure that we'll reach out to GAIL to sort out some of our garbage problems and translate it into energy. You'll be hearing from us soon, sir. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
So with that, we end the second session. The third and the last session of the day begins at 6 in the evening. So until then, we have a break. And the panelists, you're most welcome to join in for the later session if you have the time. And with that, we end this session. Thank you very much. And we are grateful for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.